Decontamination is a process to prevent, reduce, and control contamination of a person or the environment, and may be a physical or chemical process. Until recently, decontamination of the Australian public in the street was something only ever talked about and never actually done. But in the current climate, it is a very real possibility at hazmat incidents. When considering decontamination, we firstly need to define the difference between when a person is exposed and when a person is contaminated, since the meanings differ across the emergency response community. A person shall be considered exposed when they are in the area where the agent is released, breathe the agent or can smell it but have not touched it, and they require medical assessment and possibly treatment. In contrast, if a person is in the area where the agent was released, have come in contact with the agent and then leave the area, then they are considered contaminated. The person will require decontamination, medical assessment, and possibly medical treatment. Let's consider, as an example, a petrol spillage. People are in the area and smell petrol, they are exposed. But if a person steps in the petrol spill, they are contaminated. Decontamination requires a plan, which should address factors such as knowledge of the hazard and how the hazard is to be removed, environmental considerations, what resources are available to undertake decontamination, factors affecting the location of the decontamination corridor, the type and extent of decontamination, such as whether it is emergency or technical, or requires washing of hands only, the type and number of casualties, what is going to happen with the casualties after they have been decontaminated, how is the success of decontamination measured? Remember, safety is always the priority. The personnel at the decontamination corridor entrance should wear the appropriate personal protection as dictated by the nature of the materials and the circumstances. As the casualties progress through decontamination, the degree of protection required can be downgraded. A safety team donning personal protective equipment should be available with a line of hose. At a CBR incident, there will probably be several types of casualties. The first group of casualties will be emergency service personnel, including those wearing personal protective equipment and those not protected. The second broad group is the public, and they will include those rescued, they will probably exhibit the most severe symptoms, those who remove themselves, some of who will exhibit symptoms and some who will not, and those who believe they were exposed. They present no symptoms, but will probably be the largest group of casualties and place the most strain on the emergency service response. The casualties need to be prioritised for decontamination. Those who require urgent medical attention should be first. The process requires expertise from a range of agencies, particularly the ambulance service, and is commonly referred to as triage. If you are not familiar with triage, then review the section on the roles and responsibility of the ambulance service. Isolate and confine the casualties in a refuge area so they do not go off-site and contaminate hospitals, vehicles, or others in the cold zone. There are three main forms of decontamination for people. They are emergency decontamination, emergency mass decontamination, and technical decontamination. Emergency decontamination is a simple process applied to limited numbers of people who have become contaminated and their life safety requires that immediate decontamination occur. Ideally, a corridor is established and a line of hose used. The process is very simple. Either flush, strip and flush, or strip and then flush with lots of water. Emergency mass decontamination occurs when there are large numbers of people to be decontaminated. It is established when there is insufficient time to establish a technical decontamination corridor and casualties need to be decontaminated immediately. It can be applied to both responders and the public. Water is always available, so use it. Water, water, and more water. Detergent can also be used if it is available, but don't introduce other chemicals into the water without seeking expert advice. These additives may cause more harm than good. Ideally, the self-evacuated casualties should self-decontaminate, which means stripping to their undergarments. As a rule of thumb, approximately 80% of the contamination will be removed with their clothing. Ensure contact lenses and pantyhose are also removed, since they can trap the agent against the skin and eyes. The casualties should strip, walk slowly through the shower with their arms out, and be given replacement clothing. The contaminated clothing is collected, tagged, bagged, sealed, and secured. Ideally, the casualty should be checked with a detector to determine if the process was successful. Usually the process starts at the head and slowly works towards the hands and then feet. Remember the soles of the shoes and feet. Each jurisdiction has established criteria for what is considered to be clean. In some cases, the volume of casualties will outnumber the availability of detectors, in which case you should prioritise the use of detectors. The casualties are then passed to the ambulance service for medical assessment. Remember, the police are also interested in these people as they are valuable witnesses and their sealed clothing may also be evidence. There are many approaches to emergency mass decontamination, each with unique features. What is important is you are familiar with your organisation's approach. Approaches can range from using building fire hoses or building deluge systems to deck monitors and aerial streams. Recently, the Australian government has supplied a variety of mass decontamination systems, ranging from portable tents to trailer systems, that can be deployed to incidents where mass decontamination may be necessary. Each state has developed operational doctrine for deployment, and the approaches are similar across the country. In addition to the factors previously considered, when establishing a decontamination corridor, there are further issues specifically related to emergency mass decontamination. They include space required for the expected number of casualties, effective communication with the casualties, prioritising decontamination on the basis of medical symptoms exhibited, the number and type of casualties, establishing separate corridors for women, children and men. Some examples of emergency mass decontamination that are very simple and quick to establish include the single appliance method. After establishing the decontamination corridor, use a deck monitor using a low-pressure fog pattern. A line of hose can also be used to great effect. The two lines are at 45 to 90 degrees to each other to ensure the person is completely washed. The two appliance method. Establish the decontamination corridor and position the appliances about 10 metres apart to act as barriers. Deck monitors on each appliance can be used, but consider the water pattern or otherwise use low-pressure hose lines creating fog patterns. Alternatively, lines of punctured hose strung across ladders between appliances can also be used to great effect. The third method uses two appliances and an aerial appliance. Establish the decontamination corridor and extend and slightly elevate the aerial attachment, applying a low-pressure fog pattern. The other two appliances act as physical barriers and are slightly further downwind and about 10 metres apart. The two deck monitors on these appliances can be used to increase water volume in the curtain. Technical decontamination has traditionally only been applied at a hazmat incident by fire services to decontaminate protected emergency responders. It is used when there are no time constraints and limited numbers require decontamination. It is resource intensive and has limited throughput. The emergency responder is washed, then checked to ensure it was effective, and is assisted to undress before stepping into the clean area. Examples of fire service technical decontamination corridors are shown. The corridor is established, shower installed, and support functions established. The protected officer is then decontaminated. The Australian Defence Forces also use a form of technical decontamination, requiring many resources and a large amount of space. If the military are involved in the emergency response, consider their requirements, in particular the space needed, and also ensure you establish liaison with the Defence Force. In general, the Defence Force's decontamination corridor is intended to support the operational activities of Specialist Defence Force units rather than decontaminate the public.